The lightning split the Texas sky like God's own anger, and through the deluge, Isaac Jackson saw her stumbling figure collapse just beyond the overhang where he'd taken shelter with his horse. He was off his mount before conscious thought could catch up, boots splashing through rapidly forming puddles as the storm unleashed its full fury across the desert landscape. The woman lay face down in the mud, her dress torn and soaked through, dark hair plastered against her back. Isaac dropped to his knees beside her, rolling her over carefully, checking for breath. Her chest rose and fell, shallow but steady, and relief flooded through him. "Madam, madam, can you hear me?" He had to shout over the thunder that rolled across the plains like cannon fire. Her eyelids fluttered but didn't open. Isaac made a quick decision. He scooped her into his arms, surprised by how light she felt, how fragile. She couldn't weigh more than 100 pounds soaking wet, and soaking wet she certainly was. He carried her back to the rocky overhang where his horse, a sturdy roan mare named Sadie, waited with the patience born of years on the trail. The shelter wasn't much, just a jutting lip of stone that kept the worst of the rain off, but it was better than nothing. Isaac laid the woman down on the driest patch he could find, then quickly retrieved his bedroll from Sadie's saddle, spreading it beneath her. She moaned softly, and her eyes opened to slits. "Easy now," Isaac said, keeping his voice gentle despite having to speak loudly over the storm. "You're safe, I got you." Her eyes, he noticed even in the dim light, were a remarkable shade of green like spring grass after rain. They focused on him with difficulty, confusion and fear warring in their depths. "Where?" The word came out barely a whisper. "About 15 miles south of Marfa, Texas, if my reckoning is right. Middle of nowhere, truth be told." "What happened to you?" She tried to sit up, and Isaac helped support her shoulders. Now that she was somewhat conscious, he became acutely aware of her soaked clothing clinging to her frame. He quickly shrugged out of his duster, the long coat still mostly dry underneath, and draped it over her shoulders. "The wagon," she managed, her voice gaining a bit more strength. "It overturned. The horses bolted. My aunt," her voice broke, and tears mixed with the rainwater on her face. Isaac's jaw tightened. "How far back?" "I don't know. I've been walking. It feels like forever." "Was she hurt bad?" The woman's face crumpled. "She wasn't breathing. I tried to help her, but the wheel had rolled over her chest. There was blood, and she wasn't breathing, and I couldn't." A sob tore from her throat. Isaac placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "I'm sorry. Real sorry." He'd seen enough death in his 32 years to know there was nothing adequate you could say to ease that kind of pain. "What's your name?" Rose Dalton." She looked at him properly then, taking in his weathered face, the stubble on his jaw, the kind eyes beneath the brim of his soaked hat. "Thank you for helping me." "Isaac Jackson. Folks call me Isaac or just Jackson, depending on how well they know me. We need to get you somewhere warm and dry before you catch your death. This storm doesn't look like it's letting up any time soon." Rose pulled his duster tighter around herself, shivering. "Where were you headed?" "Was making my way to Marfa. Got a job waiting there, ranch work." "Where were you and your aunt traveling to?" "We were going to Marfa too. She had a sister there, my great-aunt Margaret. She runs a boarding house. My Aunt Clara was taking me there to start a new life after." She trailed off, looking away. Isaac didn't push. Everyone in the West had a past they were running from or toward, sometimes both at once. "Well, that's convenient at least. We can head there together once this storm passes. I've got some jerky and hardtack in my saddlebags if you're hungry." Rose shook her head. "I couldn't eat right now." "Thank you, though." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the rain hammer down and the thunder roll across the desert. Isaac kept a respectful distance, positioning himself between Rose and the opening of the overhang to block the wind-driven spray. Sadie stood patiently, head lowered against the storm. "I have nowhere else to go," Rose said suddenly, her voice barely audible over the rain. The words came out flat, defeated. "Aunt Clara was all I had left. I've never met Aunt Margaret. What if she doesn't want me? What if she can't take me in?" Isaac turned to look at her. In the dim light, she looked impossibly young and vulnerable, though he guessed she had to be at least 20 or so. "Then we'll figure something out. One problem at a time, though. First, we survive this storm. Then we get you to Marfa. Then we find your great aunt. Then we see what's what. You don't even know me. Why would you help me? Because you need help and I'm here. Don't need more reason than that." Isaac pulled his hat down lower, water streaming off the brim. "Besides, my mama would haunt me from the grave if I left a woman alone in the desert in a storm. She was particular about manners." The ghost of a smile touched Rose's lips. "She sounds like she was a good woman. The best." Isaac's voice softened. "Lost her 6 years back. Fever took her quick. My pa went 2 years after that. Heart just gave out. I think he died of missing her, truth be told. I'm sorry. Like I said, everyone's got their losses." Isaac shifted, trying to find a more comfortable position on the hard ground. "What about you? Where are you from originally?" "Mississippi. Small town outside of Natchez. My father died in the war when I was little. Don't even remember him really. My mother raised me and my brother on her own." Rose's voice caught. "James died of cholera 3 years ago. He was only 16. My mother followed him 6 months later." "I think you're right about people dying of heartbreak. The doctor said it was pneumonia, but I know better. That's a lot of loss for one person to carry. Aunt Clara took me in after Mama died. She'd never married, never had children of her own. I think she was lonely, and I know I was. We were good for each other. She decided we should come west, start fresh. She'd been corresponding with her sister Margaret, and Margaret said there were opportunities in Texas. Good men looking for wives, jobs for women who weren't afraid of hard work." Rose laughed bitterly. "We made it all this way, hundreds of miles, only to have it end so close to our destination. You're not at the end, Miss Dalton. You're at a beginning, just a harder one than you planned." Rose pulled the duster even tighter, hunching into its warmth. "Do you always look on the bright side of things, Mr. Jackson?" "Not always. But wallowing never helped anybody either. You can grieve and keep moving at the same time. Sometimes you have to." They fell quiet again. The storm raged on through the night, though eventually its fury began to diminish. The thunder grew more distant, the rain easing from a deluge to a steady downpour to finally, as the first gray light of dawn touched the eastern sky, a drizzle. Isaac stood, his muscles stiff from the cold and damp. "Storm's breaking. We should head out soon. Can you ride?" Rose nodded, though she looked exhausted. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her face was pale beneath the dirt and tear stains. "I can ride. I'm not much of a horsewoman, but I can stay on. That's all that matters." Isaac moved to Sadie, checking her over, tightening the cinch. The mare nuzzled his shoulder and he patted her neck affectionately. "Good girl. Just a little further, then you can rest proper." He helped Rose to her feet. She swayed slightly, and he steadied her with a hand on her elbow. "When did you last eat?" "Yesterday morning, before the storm hit." Isaac dug into his saddlebags and pulled out some jerky and hardtack. "Eat this. Not much, but it'll give you strength." Rose took the food and managed to choke down a few bites, washing it down with water from Isaac's canteen. The hardtack was tough and the jerky tougher, but she forced herself to eat, knowing he was right about needing strength. "I'll ride up front, you behind me," Isaac said. "You'll need to hold on around my waist. I know it's not proper, but proper doesn't much matter in situations like this." "I understand." Rose's voice was quiet but steady. Isaac mounted Sadie first, then reached down to help pull Rose up behind him. She settled onto the horse's back, her arms coming around his waist tentatively. Even through his vest and shirt he could feel her shaking. Cold. Yes, she admitted. It'll warm up once the sun gets higher. This time of year the days get hot even if the nights are cool. It's early June, should be downright scorching by midday. They set off at a steady walk, Sadie picking her way carefully across the rain-soaked ground. The desert had transformed overnight, arroyos running with muddy water, the air smelling of wet sage and creosote. In the distance, the mountains rose purple against the lightening sky. As they rode, Isaac found himself hyper-aware of the woman pressed against his back, her arms around him, her cheek resting between his shoulder blades. He'd been alone for a long time, drifting from ranch to ranch, town to town, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. It had been even longer since he'd felt a woman's touch, even one as innocent and necessity-driven as this. "Tell me about yourself, Mr. Jackson," Rose said after a while, "to pass the time." "Not much to tell. I'm a cowboy, been one since I was 15. Worked ranches all over Texas, New Mexico, even spent a year in Colorado. I'm good with horses, decent with cattle, can track and shoot when I need to. I don't drink much, don't gamble, don't frequent saloons unless I'm looking for work or a hot meal. I read when I can get my hands on books, though that's not often. I like sunrises better than sunsets, and I can't sing worth a damn, though I'll do it to cattle if they're restless." Rose made a sound that might have been a laugh. "That's more than not much. Your turn, then. Tell me about Rose Dalton." She was quiet for a long moment, and Isaac thought maybe she wouldn't answer. Then her voice came, soft and thoughtful. "I can read and write and do figures. My mother insisted on education. I can sew and cook and keep a house. I'm better at baking than cooking, though. I used to help at the church socials back home, and people always said my pies were the first to go. I like music, though I'm only a passable singer. I used to read novels sometimes, the ones my mother said were too romantic and silly, but I loved them anyway. I want." She stopped. "What do you want?" "I want a home. A real home, not one I'm borrowing from relatives. I want to belong somewhere to someone. I want to matter." Her voice broke a little on the last word. "You matter," Isaac said firmly. "Every person matters. Your great-aunt is going to be glad to meet you, I'd wager. And even if things don't work out there, you'll find your place. You're young, you're smart, and you're a survivor. That's clear enough. I don't feel like a survivor. I feel like I'm barely holding on. That's what surviving feels like sometimes. You're doing it anyway, though. That's what counts." The sun climbed higher as they rode, and true to Isaac's prediction, the temperature began to rise. Steam lifted from the wet ground in places, creating an otherworldly effect. They passed the scattered remains of Rose's wagon around mid-morning, and she asked Isaac to stop. "I need to see her, my aunt. I can't just leave her there." Isaac understood. He dismounted and helped Rose down, then approached the overturned wagon cautiously. Clara Dalton lay where Rose had left her, pale and still, her dress dark with rain and blood. Isaac removed his hat and stood for a moment in silence. "We should bury her," Rose said, tears streaming down her face. "It's the right thing to do. The ground's going to be too muddy to dig proper. But we can cover her with stones, make a cairn. It'll protect her until we can send someone back with a proper wagon and coffin if you want." Rose nodded, unable to speak. Together, they gathered stones, building a respectful mound over Clara's body. Rose said a prayer, her voice shaking, and Isaac added his quiet amen. They searched the wreckage of the wagon and recovered a few items. A carpet bag with some of Rose's clothes, a Bible, a tintype photograph in a frame, and a small wooden box that Rose clutched to her chest without opening. "That's my mother's jewelry," she explained. Not worth much in money, but it's all I have of her." They secured the items to Sadie's saddle and continued on. The landscape gradually changed as they traveled, becoming more rugged, more dramatic. They were in the high desert now, the elevation giving the air a clarity that made distant mountains look close enough to touch. It was late afternoon when Marfa finally came into view, a collection of buildings clustered together in the vast landscape. It wasn't a large town, maybe a few hundred people, but after the empty desert it looked like civilization itself. "We made it," Rose said, her voice a mixture of relief and apprehension. "We made it," Isaac confirmed. "Now let's find your great aunt." They rode into town slowly, Sadie's hooves clopping on the packed dirt of the main street. People turned to look at them as they passed, taking in their bedraggled appearance with curiosity. Isaac stopped in front of a general store and dismounted, then helped Rose down. "Wait here with Sadie. I'll ask inside about a boarding house run by a Margaret." The storekeeper, a round man with thinning hair and friendly eyes, nodded when Isaac asked. "You mean Margaret Dawson?" "Sure, everyone knows Margaret. Her place is 3 buildings down on the left, big white house with green shutters." "Can't miss it." Isaac thanked him and returned to Rose, found her just down the street. Rose looked toward the building the storekeeper had indicated, and Isaac saw fear flash across her face. "What if she doesn't want me?" "Only one way to find out. Come on, I'll go with you." They walked down the street, leading Sadie, and stopped in front of the boarding house. It was indeed a large white house with green shutters, well-maintained and welcoming. A sign hung from the porch, "Dawson Boarding House, respectable lodging." Isaac tied Sadie to the hitching post and turned to Rose. "Ready?" She took a deep breath and nodded. Together they climbed the porch steps, and Isaac knocked on the door. After a moment it opened to reveal a woman in her 60s, tall and straight-backed, with silver hair pulled into a neat bun and the same green eyes Rose had. "Can I help you?" Her voice was brisk but not unkind. "Mrs. Dawson, I'm Isaac Jackson and this is Rose Dalton. I believe she's your great-niece." Margaret Dawson's eyes widened and she looked at Rose closely. "Clara's girl, but where is Clara? We were expecting you next week. What happened?" Rose's composure, which had held remarkably well all day, finally crumbled. "She's dead." The wagon overturned in the storm. A wheel rolled over her chest. "She died instantly, I think, I hope. I couldn't save her, I couldn't do anything." Margaret's face paled and she reached out to grip the door frame. "Oh, dear God, Clara, my baby sister." Then she seemed to shake herself and her arms opened. "Come here, child, come here." Rose stepped forward and Margaret enfolded her in a tight embrace. The older woman was crying now, tears running down her weathered cheeks, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "You're safe now. You're home. Come inside, both of you." The interior of the boarding house was clean and comfortable, with worn but well-cared-for furniture and the smell of bread baking. Margaret led them to the kitchen, settled Rose in a chair, and immediately began bustling about, putting a kettle on for tea, slicing bread and cheese. "Now, tell me everything," she said, setting food in front of Rose and Isaac. "From the beginning." Rose recounted the story, her voice growing stronger as she spoke, perhaps bolstered by Margaret's presence and the safety of the kitchen. Isaac filled in details where he could, keeping his part simple and factual. When the story was done, Margaret sat back in her chair, her face drawn with grief but her eyes sharp and assessing. "You saved her life, Mr. Jackson. If you hadn't found her when you did, she would have died in that storm." "I did what anyone would do, madam." "Perhaps, but you're the one who actually did it. You have my profound gratitude." Margaret turned to Rose. "And you, my dear girl, you've been through hell itself. But you're here now and you're home. This is your home now for as long as you want it." Rose's eyes filled with tears again. Really? You want me, want you? Child, your family. Of course I want you. I only wish it hadn't taken such a tragedy to bring you here. Margaret reached across the table and took Rose's hand. We'll grieve Clara together, but we'll also live the way she would have wanted. Now, let's get you cleaned up and into dry clothes. You look dead on your feet. She turned to Isaac. Mr. Jackson, I insist you stay for supper. It's the least I can do. And if you need lodging, I have rooms available. Clean sheets, hot water for washing, and breakfast included. Isaac hesitated. He'd planned to find the ranch where he'd lined up work, get settled there. But the day had been long, and the thought of a real bed and a hot meal was powerfully appealing. That's generous of you, Mrs. Dawson. I accept. Excellent. Rose, come with me. Mr. Jackson, make yourself comfortable. There's a washroom just through that door if you want to clean up before supper. Supper will be ready in an hour. Margaret led Rose upstairs, leaving Isaac alone in the kitchen. He found the washroom, stripped off his wet shirt, and washed the dirt and sweat from his face and arms. The water was cold but refreshing. He caught a glimpse of himself in the small mirror above the basin and grimaced. He looked rough, his dark hair too long, his jaw shadowed with several days' worth of stubble, lines creasing his face from years in the sun. What was Rose seeing when she looked at him? An old cowboy, weathered and rough around the edges. She was young and pretty, educated and refined despite her circumstances. He'd been imagining things, thinking he felt some kind of connection during their ride. She'd just been holding on for safety's sake, nothing more. Isaac dried off and put his shirt back on, then returned to the kitchen. He sat at the table, feeling out of place in the tidy domestic space. He was used to bunkhouses and campfires, not parlors and proper meals. Margaret returned alone and began preparing supper in earnest, moving around the kitchen with practiced efficiency. Rose is lying down for a bit. Poor thing is exhausted. I've never seen anyone look so done in. She's been through a lot, that she has. But she's strong, I can see that. Takes after her mother and Clara both. The Dalton women are survivors. Margaret glanced at him as she stirred a pot on the stove. Tell me, Mr. Jackson. What are your plans now? I've got a job lined up at the Hastings Ranch working cattle. Plan to head out there tomorrow if that suits. The Hastings place. That's a good outfit. Ben Hastings is a fair man, pays his hands decent wages. You'll do well there. She paused. Will you be staying in the area then? For a while at least. Work's work. I go where it is. I see. Margaret fell quiet, focusing on her cooking, but Isaac got the sense she was thinking about something, weighing her words. Supper was a simple but hearty affair. Beef stew, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. Rose came down when Margaret called, looking slightly better for having washed and changed into clean clothes. The dress she wore was faded but neatly mended, and she'd braided her dark hair back from her face. The meal was quiet, the weight of the day's events and Clara's death settling over them. But there was comfort in the quiet, in the simple act of breaking bread together. Isaac found himself watching Rose when he thought she wasn't looking, noting the delicate line of her jaw, the way her lashes cast shadows on her cheeks, the graceful movement of her hands. Stop it, he told himself firmly. She's grieving and vulnerable, and you're a drifter with nothing to offer. Leave her be. After supper, Margaret showed Isaac to a small but clean room on the second floor. Breakfast is at 7, she said. Sleep well, Mr. Jackson. He did sleep well, better than he had in months on the hard ground. The bed was soft, the sheets clean-smelling, and for the first time in a long while, Isaac felt safe enough to truly rest. He woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee and bacon drifting up from downstairs. He dressed quickly, splashed water on his face, and headed down to the kitchen. Rose was already there, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee cradled in her hands. She looked up when he entered, and something in her expression made his heart skip. "Good morning, Mr. Jackson." "Morning, Miss Dalton. Sleep well." "Better than I expected to, honestly. Aunt Margaret's house is very comfortable." Margaret appeared from the pantry, her arms full of eggs and vegetables. "Good morning, Mr. Jackson. I hope you're hungry. I always make too much food." Breakfast was indeed substantial. Eggs, bacon, biscuits, gravy, and fried potatoes. They ate in companionable silence until Margaret set down her fork and looked at Isaac seriously. "Mr. Jackson, I have a proposition for you." Isaac raised an eyebrow. "Madam." "Rose needs to go back and give her aunt a proper burial. I'm too old to make that trip myself, and I can't let her go alone. Would you be willing to take her? I'll pay you for your time and trouble. I know it's an imposition, especially when you have a job waiting." Isaac considered. The Hastings Ranch would wait another day or two, and the thought of Rose making that journey with anyone else, some stranger who might not be as respectful or careful, didn't sit right with him. "I'll do it," he said. "No payment necessary. It's the right thing to do. I insist on paying you. And I'll provide supplies, a wagon, everything you need. Rose can show you where the accident happened, and you can bring Clara back to be buried in the cemetery here. She should be with family." Rose looked at Isaac, her green eyes shining with unshed tears. "Would you really do that?" "Take me back there." "I would. We'll leave this afternoon if your aunt can arrange the wagon that quick." "I can," Margaret said firmly. "I'll go to the undertaker and the livery right now." True to her word, Margaret had everything arranged by early afternoon. A small wagon with a team of horses stood ready, along with a plain pine coffin, shovels, and supplies for the journey. Isaac checked everything over with the practiced eye of a man who'd learned that preparation could mean the difference between life and death in the desert. Rose emerged from the house wearing a split riding skirt, more practical than the dress she'd worn yesterday. She'd tied a bonnet over her braided hair and carried a small pack. "I'm ready," she said. The journey back took most of the afternoon. Isaac drove the wagon while Rose sat beside him on the bench seat. The weather was clear and hot, the storm of 2 days ago seeming like a distant memory, except for the evidence of its passing in the still damp ground and swollen arroyos. They talked as they traveled, the conversation ranging from inconsequential topics to deeper ones. Rose spoke of her childhood in Mississippi, the way the magnolias bloomed in spring, the humidity that made every summer day feel like swimming through air. Isaac talked about his years on the trail, the beauty of cattle drives under starlit skies, the satisfaction of hard work well done. "You ever get lonely?" Rose asked suddenly. "Always moving, never settling down." Isaac was quiet for a long moment. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But I figured lonely on your own is better than lonely with the wrong person. And I never met the right person, so moving seemed easier than staying still." "I understand that," Rose said softly. "I always thought I'd marry young like my mother did. But the war killed so many men, and then the ones who came back were so changed, so haunted. And then when Mama died, I was just trying to survive day to day. Romance seemed like a luxury I couldn't afford." "How old are you, if you don't mind my asking?" 22. "I'll be 23 in August." She glanced at him. "And you?" 32. "I'll be 33 in October." "That's not so old." Isaac laughed. "Feels old some days, especially when I wake up stiff from sleeping on the ground." They reached the site of the accident as the sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon. The cairn they'd built over Clara's body was undisturbed, and Isaac said a silent prayer of thanks. He'd heard stories of animals scattering burial stones. The work of excavating the cairn and placing Clara's body in the coffin was grim and difficult. Rose insisted on helping, despite Isaac's protests. Together, they worked carefully and respectfully, and Isaac was moved by the tenderness Rose showed her aunt, the way she smoothed Clara's hair and folded her hands across her chest before they closed the coffin lid. "She was good to me," Rose said, tears streaming down her face. "She didn't have to take me in, but she did. She gave me hope when I had none, and now she's gone, and I never got to tell her how grateful I was." "She knew," Isaac said gently. "People always know when they're loved." They loaded the coffin into the wagon as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red. Isaac built a small fire, and they made camp for the night, neither of them wanting to travel in the dark with such precious cargo. Rose sat close to the fire, hugging her knees to her chest. "Thank you for doing this," she said, "for helping me. I know you had other places to be." "I'm where I'm supposed to be," Isaac said, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. "Sometimes things work out the way they're meant to, even when the path there is hard." Rose looked at him across the fire, and something passed between them, an understanding, a recognition. Isaac felt his heart beat faster, felt the pull of attraction he'd been trying to deny. "She's grieving," he reminded himself. "She's vulnerable. Don't be the kind of man who takes advantage of that." They sat in silence, watching the fire burn down to embers, and eventually Rose wrapped herself in a blanket and lay down near the fire. Isaac kept watch, sitting with his back against a rock, letting his thoughts wander. He'd been telling the truth when he said he'd never met the right person. There had been women over the years, brief encounters that meant little, a few that had promised to mean more but fizzled out when the time came for him to move on. He'd convinced himself he was fine alone, that he didn't need the complication of love and commitment. But watching Rose sleep, her face peaceful in the firelight, Isaac felt something shift inside him. What if the right person had been out there all along, and he'd just never been in the right place at the right time to meet her? What if the storm that had nearly killed Rose had actually been the thing that brought them together? He shook his head at his own foolishness. 2 days. He'd known her for 2 days. That wasn't enough time to fall in love. That was infatuation, proximity, the natural human need for connection. And yet, they set out at dawn, making good time back to Marfa. Margaret was waiting anxiously, and when they arrived, she immediately began arranging the funeral. It would be held the next day, she decided, giving time to notify any friends Clara might have corresponded with in the area. The funeral was small but dignified. The local minister said the words, and Clara was laid to rest in the town cemetery under a cottonwood tree. Rose stood between Margaret and Isaac, her hand finding his and gripping tight as the coffin was lowered into the ground. After the burial, Margaret hosted a small gathering at the boarding house. A few townsfolk came to pay their respects, curious about the new arrival and sympathetic to her loss. Isaac stood to the side, feeling out of place among the domestic gathering, but Rose kept glancing his way as if to reassure herself he was still there. When the last of the visitors had left, Margaret turned to Isaac. "Will you be heading to the Hastings ranch now?" "I suppose I should," Isaac said, though he found himself reluctant. "I've put it off long enough." "You could stay one more night," Rose said quickly, then blushed. "I mean, if you wanted to. No obligation, of course." Margaret looked between the two of them with assessing eyes, and Isaac saw the moment understanding dawned in her expression. "Yes, please do stay, Mr. Jackson. I'd rest easier knowing you had a good night's sleep before starting work at the ranch." Isaac found himself agreeing, though he knew he was only delaying the inevitable. He couldn't stay at the boarding house forever. He had a job, a life to get back to, such as it was. That evening, after supper, Rose asked if he'd like to take a walk. Margaret smiled and shooed them out the door, saying the dishes could wait. They walked through the town as the sun set, the air cooling rapidly as it did in the desert. Rose had a shawl wrapped around her shoulders, and Isaac found himself wanting to put his arm around her to pull her close against the chill. He kept his hands firmly in his pockets. "I don't want you to go," Rose said suddenly, stopping in the middle of the street. "I know that's selfish of me. You have a job, a life. But these past few days you've been so kind, so steady. I feel safe with you, and I haven't felt safe in a very long time." Isaac turned to face her fully. "Rose, I know I'm just a burden to you," she continued, the words tumbling out in a rush. "A responsibility you didn't ask for, and I know I shouldn't say these things. We barely know each other. But I feel like I do know you. Does that make sense? I feel like I know the kind of man you are, and that's the kind of man I've been hoping existed." "You're not a burden," Isaac said firmly. "Not to me, never to me." He took a breath, deciding to throw caution to the wind. "And I don't want to go either. These past few days, being around you, it's made me feel something I haven't felt in years, maybe never. Like I found something I didn't even know I was looking for." Rose stepped closer to him, looking up into his face. "Then why do you have to go? Because it's the right thing. Because you're grieving and vulnerable, and I won't take advantage of that. Because you need time to settle in here to figure out your life. Because falling for a drifting cowboy is the last thing you need. Don't I get to decide what I need? Rose, I'm 22 years old, Isaac. I've buried my entire family. I've traveled hundreds of miles to start over. I've survived a storm that should have killed me. I think I've earned the right to make my own choices." Her voice was fierce, passionate. "And I choose you, if you'll have me." Isaac felt something break open inside him, some wall he'd built years ago crumbling to dust. "You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying. I'm saying I want to know you better. I'm saying I want to see where this could go. I'm saying don't leave me behind just because you think it's the noble thing to do." "The Hastings Ranch is only 5 miles from town," Isaac heard himself say. "I could ride in on Sundays if you wanted." Rose smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. "I want that very much." Isaac couldn't help himself. He reached out and cupped her face in his rough, calloused hand. She leaned into the touch, her eyes drifting closed. "We'll take this slow," he said softly. "We'll do this right. I'm going to court you proper, Rose Dalton, with your aunt's permission and everything above board." "That sounds perfect." They walked back to the boarding house hand in hand, and Isaac felt lighter than he had in years. Margaret took one look at their faces when they came through the door and smiled knowingly. "Mr. Jackson, I hope we'll be seeing more of you around here," she said. "Yes, madam, if that's all right with you." "More than all right. Rose could use a friend, someone steady and reliable. Someone who won't let her down." "I won't, madam. You have my word on that." Isaac left for the Hastings Ranch the next morning, but not before saying a proper goodbye to Rose. They stood on the porch of the boarding house, and Isaac took both her hands in his. "I'll be back Sunday," he promised. "And I'll write if I can." "I'll be waiting," Rose said. He wanted to kiss her, wanted it so badly his chest ached. But it was too soon, too fast, despite the intensity of what he felt. So instead, he brought her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, and the look in her eyes told him she understood. The Hastings Ranch was everything he'd hoped for. Ben Hastings was indeed a fair man, and the work was hard but satisfying. Isaac threw himself into it, working alongside the other ranch hands, proving his worth. The days were long, but Isaac didn't mind. Physical exhaustion kept his mind from spinning endlessly around thoughts of Rose. Sunday couldn't come fast enough. Isaac was up before dawn, washing carefully, shaving for the first time in weeks, putting on his cleanest shirt. The other hands teased him good-naturedly, having figured out that their new colleague had found himself a girl in town. He rode Sadie into Marfa, arriving at the boarding house just as the church bells were ringing for the morning service. Margaret answered his knock, already dressed for church, and smiled at him. "Right on time, Mr. Jackson. Rose is just finishing getting ready." Rose appeared at the top of the stairs, and Isaac's breath caught. She wore a dress of soft blue that brought out the green of her eyes, and her dark hair was arranged in a simple but elegant style. She looked beautiful, and Isaac couldn't take his eyes off her. They attended church together, sitting in the pew with Margaret, and Isaac was acutely aware of Rose beside him, the warmth of her arm nearly touching his, the sound of her voice raised in him. After the service, they walked through town, talking and laughing, getting to know each other in the daylight of ordinary life. "How's the ranch?" Rose asked. "Good. Hard work, but I like it. Mr. Hastings is a good boss and the other hands are decent fellows. I think I'll stay on for a while." "I'm glad." Rose glanced at him shyly. "Aunt Margaret has been teaching me her recipes. I made bread yesterday and it actually turned out well. She says I'm a natural at baking. I remember you said your pies were popular back home. That was a long time ago. It feels like a lifetime ago." Rose's expression grew wistful. "But I'm starting to think maybe I could build something new here. Aunt Margaret suggested I could help her with the boarding house, maybe eventually take it over when she's ready to retire. She never had children of her own, and she says it would give her peace knowing the place was in family hands." "That sounds like a good opportunity." "It does. I like the work. I like taking care of people, making them comfortable, and I like having a purpose." They found a bench in the shade of a building and sat together, watching the town go by. Children ran past, chasing each other in some elaborate game. A wagon rattled down the street. An old dog sprawled in a patch of sunlight, dozing. "Isaac," Rose said softly, "tell me about your dreams. What do you want from life?" Isaac was quiet for a long moment, thinking. "I used to think I didn't want anything except the next job, the next sunrise. But lately, I've been thinking maybe I want more than that. Maybe I want a place to call home. Maybe I want someone to come home to." He looked at her directly. "Maybe I want what my parents had, a partnership, a love that lasts." Rose's hand found his, their fingers intertwining. "I want that too." They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, dreaming of possibilities. The weeks that followed fell into a pattern. Isaac worked hard at the ranch during the week, learning the land and the cattle, proving himself to be a valuable hand. Ben Hastings took notice, giving him more responsibility, better pay. On Sundays, Isaac rode into town and spent the day with Rose. They walked together, talked for hours, shared meals at the boarding house. Margaret chaperoned discreetly, but gave them enough privacy to build something real. Isaac learned that Rose loved to read and would spend hours absorbed in books when her work was done. He began bringing her books from the ranch's small library, thrilled by the way her face lit up when he presented each new volume. Rose learned that Isaac had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh. She learned that he was patient and kind, that he noticed small things like when she was tired or worried and would gently ask what was wrong. She learned that he kept his promises, always arriving when he said he would, never disappointing her. As summer deepened and the heat became intense, the town celebrated the 4th of July with a festival. There was a dance in the town hall, and Isaac worked up the courage to ask Rose to attend with him. "I'm not much of a dancer," he warned. "I'll probably step on your feet." "I don't care," Rose said, smiling. "I'd be honored to go with you." The night of the dance, Isaac arrived at the boarding house wearing a borrowed jacket that didn't quite fit right. But when Rose opened the door, her eyes went wide with appreciation. "You look handsome," she said. "And you look beautiful," Isaac replied, taking in her dress of pale green that made her eyes luminous. The dance was lively and joyful, the hall decorated with bunting and lanterns. A small band played fiddle and guitar, and the townspeople danced with abandon. True to his word, Isaac wasn't a graceful dancer, but he held Rose carefully and moved with enough competence to avoid complete embarrassment. "See," Rose said, laughing as they turned through a simple waltz. "You're doing fine." "That's because you're a good partner," Isaac replied. As the night wore on and the music slowed, Isaac held Rose closer and she rested her head against his shoulder. They swayed together, not really following any particular dance steps anymore, just moving to the music. "Isaac," Rose murmured, "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "I'm falling in love with you." She pulled back to look up at him. "I know we said we'd take things slow, and we have, but I can't keep pretending what I feel is anything less than love." Isaac's heart hammered in his chest. "Rose, you don't have to say it back," she said quickly. "I just needed you to know. I needed to be honest." "I was going to say," Isaac continued, a smile playing at his lips, "that I'm falling in love with you too. Have been since the day I pulled you out of that storm, I think. Maybe even since the moment you opened your eyes and looked at me." Rose's smile was radiant. "Really, really. I love you, Rose Dalton. I love your strength and your kindness. I love the way you see the world. I love who I am when I'm with you." Right there, in the middle of the dance floor with half the town around them, Isaac cupped Rose's face in his hands and kissed her. It was their first kiss, gentle and sweet and full of promise. Around them, people smiled and whispered, but Isaac and Rose were lost in their own world. When they finally broke apart, Rose was blushing but smiling. "That was worth waiting for," she said breathlessly. "I should have done it weeks ago." No, the timing was perfect. Isaac walked Rose home that night, their hands clasped, stealing kisses in the shadows between street lamps. On the porch of the boarding house, he kissed her goodnight properly, taking his time, memorizing the feel of her lips on his, the way she sighed softly when he pulled her close. "I should go," he said reluctantly. "I know, but come back soon. Sunday like always. And every Sunday after that, as long as you'll have me." As summer turned to autumn, Isaac and Rose's relationship deepened. They talked about the future now, making plans instead of just daydreaming. Isaac had saved nearly every penny of his wages, building up a small nest egg. He was thinking about what it would take to start his own place someday. Maybe a small ranch where he could run his own cattle. In late October, on Isaac's 33rd birthday, Rose and Margaret prepared a special dinner. After the meal, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set, Isaac took Rose's hand and led her down to the garden behind the house. "I've been thinking," he said, suddenly nervous, "about the future, about what I want." "And what do you want, Isaac Jackson?" He dropped to one knee, pulling a small box from his pocket. Inside was a simple gold band with a small pearl set in it. "I want you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to build a life with you, a home with you. I want to be your husband if you'll have me. Rose Dalton, will you marry me?" Rose's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." Isaac stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her deeply. When they finally broke apart, both laughing with joy, Margaret appeared on the porch, grinning widely. "It's about time," she called out. "I was beginning to think you'd never ask." "You knew," Isaac called back. "Of course I knew. I've been planning a wedding in my head for months now." They were married in early November, just before the weather turned truly cold. The ceremony was simple but beautiful, held in the same church where they'd attended services together all those months. Rose wore a dress of ivory silk that Margaret had helped her sew, and Isaac wore a new suit that Ben Hastings had insisted on buying him as a wedding gift. Ben and his wife, Martha, attended the wedding, along with many of the ranch hands Isaac had befriended. Margaret cried happy tears throughout the ceremony, and the whole town seemed to turn out to celebrate the union of the cowboy and the woman he'd rescued from the storm. Isaac and Rose exchanged vows before God and community, promising to love and cherish each other all their days. When the minister said Isaac could kiss his bride, he did so tenderly, reverently, still hardly believing his luck. They had a small reception at the boarding house, with cake and dancing and laughter. Ben Hastings pulled Isaac aside at one point, clapping him on the shoulder. "You've done good work for me this year, Jackson. You're one of the best hands I've had. But I know you've been saving your money, planning for your own place, so I'm giving you a wedding gift. There's 100 acres adjoining my property to the south. Good grazing land with a creek running through it. It's yours if you want it. I'll sell it to you for a fair price and you can pay me back over time." Isaac was stunned. "Mr. Hastings, that's too generous. It's good business. I'd rather have a reliable neighbor than sell to a stranger." "You think about it. Talk it over with your wife and let me know." Isaac did talk it over with Rose that very night, in the small room Margaret had prepared for them at the boarding house, where they would stay until they could build their own home. "It's a chance to start something real," Isaac said, holding Rose in his arms, "to put down roots, but it's a risk too. What if I can't make it work?" "You'll make it work," Rose said confidently. "And you won't be doing it alone. We're partners now. We'll build this life together." They accepted Ben's offer, and all that winter, Isaac worked on their land in addition to his regular ranch duties. With the help of the other ranch hands, he began building a small house, simple but sturdy. Rose helped when she could, and Margaret contributed furniture and household goods, insisting she had more than enough at the boarding house. By spring, the house was finished. It wasn't much to look at, just a few rooms, but it was theirs. Rose cried when Isaac carried her over the threshold, overwhelmed with happiness. "It's perfect," she said, looking around at the bare walls and rough wooden floors. "It's home." They settled into married life with surprising ease. Isaac was a kind and considerate husband, and Rose proved to be an equal partner in every way. She managed the household with efficiency, kept a garden that provided vegetables through the summer, and even helped with the cattle when extra hands were needed. Their first year of marriage wasn't without challenges. The work was hard, and money was tight as they paid back Ben Hastings and built up their herd. There were setbacks. Cattle lost to illness, a dry spell that worried them through late summer, repairs needed on the house when winter storms proved its weak points. But through it all, Isaac and Rose faced everything together. They laughed together over simple meals. They held each other close on cold nights. They planned and dreamed and worked toward their future. In the spring of their second year of marriage, Rose discovered she was pregnant. She told Isaac one evening as they sat on their small porch, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and red. "We're going to have a baby," she said simply. Isaac pulled her close, kissing the top of her head, too overwhelmed with emotion to speak for a moment. "A baby," he finally managed. "We're going to be parents. Are you happy?" Happy doesn't begin to cover it. I'm terrified and thrilled and grateful all at once. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Margaret fussed over Rose, making sure she ate enough and rested properly. Isaac was alternately overprotective and awed, treating Rose like she was made of glass one moment and marveling at the changes in her body the next. "I never thought I'd have this," he confided one night, his hand resting gently on Rose's swollen belly. "A wife, a child, a home. I thought I was meant to be alone." "You were never meant to be alone," Rose said softly. "You were just waiting for me, just like I was waiting for you." In early November, on a cool autumn evening, Rose went into labor. Margaret and Martha Hastings attended her, shooing Isaac out of the room despite his protests. He paced outside for hours, listening to Rose's cries of pain and effort, feeling helpless and terrified. Finally, just as the sun was rising, a baby's cry pierced the air. Martha opened the door, smiling broadly. "You have a son," she said. "A beautiful, healthy boy, and Rose is fine. Tired, but fine." Isaac rushed into the room to find Rose propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. "Come meet your son," she said. Isaac approached on shaking legs and looked down at the baby. He was red-faced and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair and tiny, perfect fingers that gripped Isaac's when he offered one. "He's beautiful," Isaac whispered. "You're both beautiful." They named him James after Rose's brother, with the middle name of Richard after Isaac's father. Jamie, they called him, and from the first moment he had both his parents wrapped around his tiny finger. The years that followed were full and rich. The ranch prospered slowly but steadily. Isaac's hard work and Rose's careful management paid off, and they were able to expand their herd, improve their house, and eventually hire a hand or two to help with the work. Jamie grew into a bright, curious boy with his mother's green eyes and his father's quiet determination. He learned to ride almost as soon as he could walk, following Isaac around the ranch like a devoted shadow. When Jamie was 3, Rose became pregnant again, and this time she gave birth to a daughter they named Clara Margaret, after both their beloved aunts. Clara had Rose's dark hair and Isaac's easy smile, and she grew up fearless and strong. 2 years after Clara came another son, whom they named Thomas, and then, when Rose was 31 and Isaac 40, a surprise baby girl they named Rebecca. The house expanded to accommodate their growing family, room by room. The ranch grew too, and they prospered modestly but comfortably. Isaac never became a wealthy man, but he had everything that mattered: a wife he adored, children he loved beyond measure, and land of his own. On Sunday afternoons, the whole family would ride into Marfa to visit Margaret at the boarding house. As the years passed and Margaret grew older, Rose and the children took on more of the work of running the place. Eventually, when Margaret was in her 80s and ready to retire, Rose took over completely, managing both the boarding house and the ranch household with impressive capability. Margaret lived to see all 4 of Rose's children grown, and she died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 86, surrounded by family. They buried her next to Clara in the town cemetery, and Rose spoke at the funeral about the woman who had given her a home when she had nowhere else to go, who had become a mother to her when she'd lost her own. As Jamie grew older, he showed a natural talent for ranching and took over more of the day-to-day operations, allowing Isaac to slow down a bit. Clara surprised everyone by becoming a teacher, opening a small school in town and proving to be gifted with children. Thomas joined the army for a few years, but eventually returned home to help with the ranch. Rebecca, the youngest, showed a talent for business and eventually took over the full management of the boarding house from Rose. Isaac and Rose grew old together, their hair turning silver, their faces lined with years of sun and laughter. They watched their children marry and have children of their own, filling their lives with grandchildren who ran wild on the ranch just as their parents had. On their 30th wedding anniversary, Isaac and Rose sat together on the porch of their house, watching the sunset just as they had on so many evenings before. Their hands were clasped, their chairs pulled close together. "You remember the day we met?" Rose asked, her voice soft with memory. Every detail, Isaac replied. The storm, the lightning, you lying in the mud, the way you opened your eyes and looked at me. I remember thinking you had kind eyes. Even scared as I was, I knew I was safe with you. You told me you had nowhere else to go. I didn't. But you gave me somewhere to go. You gave me everything. Isaac raised their joined hands and kissed her knuckles, the gesture as tender now as it had been all those years ago. No, you gave me everything. Before you, I was just drifting. You gave me purpose. You gave me a home. We gave each other a home, Rose corrected gently. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant colors. Somewhere in the house behind them, they could hear the sounds of their family, grandchildren playing, their son discussing ranch business, laughter and music and life. No regrets, Isaac asked. Not a single one, Rose replied. You? Only that I wish I'd found you sooner. Wish we'd had even more time together. We have time still, Rose said, squeezing his hand. Plenty of time. And they did have more time, though neither knew how much. They spent their remaining years surrounded by love and family, watching their children and grandchildren build lives of their own. They sat on their porch every evening that weather allowed, holding hands and watching the sunset, grateful for every day they'd been given. Isaac died first at the age of 76, passing peacefully in his sleep with Rose beside him. The whole town turned out for his funeral, testifying to the impact he'd had on the community. He was remembered as a fair man, a hard worker, a devoted husband and father, and a friend to many. Rose lived 3 more years, spending her days surrounded by family, telling stories of the early days to her grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She spoke often of the storm that had brought her and Isaac together, of the lonely cowboy who had saved her life and given her a love that lasted a lifetime. I had nowhere else to go, she would tell them, her eyes distant with memory, and he gave me everywhere I needed to be. When Rose died at the age of 79, she was buried next to Isaac in the Marfa Cemetery, under the cottonwood tree not far from where Clara and Margaret rested. On her gravestone, beneath her name and dates, her children had inscribed a simple phrase: beloved wife, mother, and friend. She found home in a storm. The ranch passed to Jamie, who ran it well and passed it in turn to his own son. The boarding house continued under Rebecca's management, becoming a landmark in Marfa, known for its hospitality and excellent pie, recipes that had been Rose's and Margaret's before her. Clara's school grew, educating generations of children. Thomas's children carried on the family traditions, some staying in Marfa, some venturing out to make their own way in the world. And on summer evenings, when storms rolled across the desert and lightning split the sky, the family would remember the story of how it all began. How a lone cowboy had found a woman in a storm, how she'd whispered that she had nowhere else to go, and how together they'd built something that lasted long after they were gone. It was a love story, plain and simple, but it was also a story of resilience, of second chances, of finding home in another person. It was a story of the American West, of hard work and harder times, of building something from nothing with your own 2 hands and the help of someone who believed in you. Most of all, it was a story of hope. Hope that even in the darkest storms, rescue can come. Hope that even when you think you have nowhere to go, someone might appear to show you the way. Hope that love, real and true and lasting, is possible if you're brave enough to reach for it. Isaac and Rose's great-great-grandchildren still live in and around Marfa, carrying on the family legacy. Some work the ranch that Isaac started with sweat and determination. Some run the boarding house that Margaret founded and Rose expanded. Some teach in schools descended from the one Clara established. They are teachers and ranchers, businesspeople and artists, scattered across Texas and beyond. But they all know the story of their ancestors. They know about the storm in June of 1882, about a woman who had lost everything and a man who had been alone too long. They know about the love that grew from that desperate meeting, about the life that was built on faith and hard work and devotion. They know that their very existence is a testament to a moment of kindness, a decision to help a stranger, a willingness to love when it would have been easier to walk away. And on those summer evenings when storms roll in, when lightning illuminates the desert and thunder shakes the ground, they think of Isaac and Rose. They think of beginnings that come disguised as endings, of hope that persists even in the darkest moments, of love that changes everything. The house that Isaac built with his own hands still stands on the ranch, though it's been added onto and modernized over the years. The porch where he and Rose sat every evening remains, and on it sits 2 rocking chairs, old and worn but carefully maintained. Sometimes on quiet evenings, if you look closely, you can almost see them there still. 2 silver-haired figures holding hands, watching the sunset, grateful for every moment they were given. That's the legacy they left behind. Not wealth or fame, but love. Love that multiplied and grew, spreading out through generations, touching countless lives. Love that started in a storm and lasted far beyond their years on earth, becoming something immortal, something that time couldn't diminish or death couldn't end. And in Marfa, Texas, in the boarding house that still operates under the family name, there hangs a photograph. It's old and faded, taken on Isaac and Rose's 25th wedding anniversary. They stand together in front of their house, surrounded by their children and grandchildren. Isaac's arm is around Rose's waist, and they're both smiling, their faces lined with age but radiant with happiness. Beneath the photograph is a small brass plaque, placed there by Rebecca before she died. It reads simply, "Isaac and Rose Jackson. He found her in a storm. She found home in him. 1882 forever." And that, really, is the heart of it. Sometimes love comes when you least expect it, in the middle of chaos and loss and fear. Sometimes the person who saves your life becomes the person you can't imagine living without. Sometimes, when you think you have nowhere else to go, someone takes your hand and says, "Come with me. I'll show you home." That's what Isaac did for Rose and what Rose did for Isaac. They showed each other home. They built it together, maintained it together, filled it with life and love and laughter. And long after they were gone, that home remained, not just in the physical structures they left behind, but in the hearts of everyone they touched, everyone who knew their story, everyone who believed in the power of love to transform and redeem and create something beautiful from the ashes of loss. On summer nights in Marfa, when the storms come rolling in across the desert, people still tell the story. Parents tell it to children, grandparents to grandchildren, and it becomes part of the town's folklore, part of its identity. The story of the lone cowboy and the woman in the storm, the story of love that endured, the story that reminds everyone that even in the darkest moments, hope remains. And somewhere, if you believe in such things, Isaac and Rose are together still, sitting on their porch, holding hands, watching sunsets that never end. They are home, finally and forever, exactly where they were always meant to be, together in a love that proved stronger than storms, stronger than time, stronger than death itself. That is their story, complete and whole, a circle closed, a promise kept, a love fulfilled. From the moment Isaac pulled Rose from the mud to the moment they were laid to rest side by side, their story was one of devotion, partnership, and enduring love. They asked nothing of life except each other, and they received so much more. Family, prosperity, community, and most importantly, a love that became legendary. The storm that brought them together was fierce and destructive, but from it grew something beautiful and lasting. Rose had whispered that she had nowhere else to go, and Isaac had given her everywhere she needed to be. Together, they proved that home isn't a place but a person, that family is what you build with love and commitment, and that the greatest adventures come not from wandering alone but from choosing to walk life's path side by side with someone who sees you, knows you, and loves you anyway. Their story ended as all stories must, with death and parting, but it ended well, with lives well lived and love well given. And in the memories of their descendants, in the land they tended, in the house they built, in the very air of Marfa itself, Isaac and Rose Jackson live on, a testament to the power of love to create something permanent in an impermanent world, to build something lasting from a moment of grace in the middle of a storm.